Hey, beautiful soul. You're listening to the Rising into Mindful Motherhood podcast, your weekly dose of fertility wisdom. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Wood. I'm a barefoot mama bear, pharmacist, and integrative fertility coach. This is your go-to podcast for all things to naturally nourish your fertility, embody womb healing, and reclaim your feminine power to accelerate your path to pregnancy. My expert guests and I will be having intentional conversations to discuss the many facets of a thriving, fertile foundation, natural wellness, and how we grow and transform as women on our journey to motherhood. So let's dive in, shall we? Hello and welcome to Rising into Mindful Motherhood. In this episode, I'll be talking with Dr. Brad Montagne, a doctor of science in pastoral medicine and pioneer in functional medicine. He battled with his own chronic illness as a young child and began managing his own illness by making his own diet and lifestyle changes when he was young. In his adult life, he conquered his own case of Lyme disease and Babesia with the tools he presents today. Dr. Brad is now at the tail end of his fourth decade doing clinical research in innovative functional medicine, helping people regain their lives and health. He is known for having one of the highest rates of helping restore health to people with the worst case scenarios, even after expert care has failed. So I absolutely love that. I feel like there is always another option. Even after seeing so many different doctors, there's always another alternative. And in today's episode, we'll be discussing thyroiditis and Hashimoto's and the effect that it can have on hormones and fertility. So this is a really, really big one. You're going to want to listen in. So welcome, Dr. Brad. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this too.
Yeah, so thyroid problems. I feel like this is so common in our day and age, whether you're trying to get pregnant or not. What is your take on why this is so common?
It all ties into key issues. They've destroyed our food supply over here in the US of A. It's really toxic. When you look at what people do with their lifestyle, the use of medications, stress, steroids, food intolerances, anything that creates any kind of inflammatory response inside of the gut changes the way the gut functions. And that's really the key for basically everything. And we look at the thyroid, it's one of the first things that gets infected when the gut has problems. And it's funny, when you look at the research, you got all these different mechanisms that go on for different things. But I was doing a talk some time back at a business meeting. There were three other doctors there, and I was just about to release my book. It's Exposing Lyme and Chronic Illness. And we typically did a short introduction, had a dinner, and then people talked afterwards. And I was supposed to talk that night. I said, so instead of doing the introduction, I'm going to be one of the speakers. I'm going to give everybody a choice. While you're eating dinner, you guys think about it. I can either talk about my book I'm about ready to release, or I got a pretty deep well. We could just do a Q&A. So you guys decide. Once it comes to my turn, you speak up, and I can go either way. It's fine. Ask me whatever you want. And one of the other docs says, so what do you do for COVID? And the conversation opened up, really blew everybody away. But they were autoimmune specialists, the doc that asked me that question. And in that talk, I was talking about autoimmunity, which is what Hashimoto's is autoimmune thyroid issues. And I said, the immune system only responds to two things only. What are they? None of the other three docs had any clue, not even autoimmune specialists. And you think, how in the world can you specialize in something you don't know how it works? But we'll get into that a little bit later. But the whole issue of thyroiditis is an inflammatory response in the thyroid that's commonly from nutritional deficiency toxicity. And when that toxicity gets to a certain point, it starts creating autoimmune responses. So if I back up a little bit, Why does it affect women so much? When we look at the toxins out there in the world today, herbicides, pesticides, and all the other things that go on, most of those are estrogenic
Mm-hmm.
xenoestrogens.
Mm-hmm.
Men don't have nearly the estrogen receptors as women do. So women get affected a whole bunch more than men do. And when you look at things like the thyroid, it always amazes me how much key information is just deleted from the general knowledge of people and all that. Like the amount of women that you talk to whose mothers explain to them about their cycles and how they have to deal with it is precious few. And it's not something you should learn out in the street. It should be in a good place. When you look at fertility issues, women's cycles, the thyroid's 50% of what controls our cycles. And thyroid dysfunction is responsible for 60% of the miscarriages.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was before the pandemic and all that went on, and that increased and that changed a bit as far as that goes. But that's how important it is. So years ago, we had a nurse come into our office. She'd just seen their OB. She'd been bleeding, hemorrhaging for 2 months at least. The OB couldn't figure out what it was. She'd thrown every bullet she had at it. The nurse was headed home, talked to a friend, and said, my OB just said, we're supposed to come back in Friday morning, and she's either going to ablate my uterus, burn the inside, chemically burn it, or she's going to cut it out. And the lady she's talking to says, you need to go see my doctor. So she talked to her, she called me, she turned around on her way home, came into her office. So I think it was Wednesday, late afternoon, figured out what it was, figured out how to resolve all this stuff. And she asked me at the end of that visit, so how long does it usually take you to stop a woman hemorrhaging like this? I said, typically within 24 hours, unless it's thyroid, and then that could take like 72 if I'm not sure that's what the cause is, but we know it is, so we're going to address all that together. She calls me and I said, I want you to come in here on your way to your OB appointment on Friday. So I want to see you first. She comes in, plops down, and goes, so what do you think I should do? I said, what's going on with you? She goes, what do you mean? Well, how's the flow? And she goes, I went home, I started doing what you gave me, started following that. I woke up the next morning, I was just spotting. By noon it quit, and I haven't bled a drop since. And she just looks at me funny. So what do you think I should do? I said, why are you asking me? The whole reason you're going to your OB is now resolved. And it didn't hit her till then. But that's how big the thyroid is and how quickly you can really resolve these things when you understand what really sets the stage for everything that's going on. If we talk about the background of all that, actually, let's talk about thyroid function and we'll talk about the background because the thyroid's the weirdest endocrine organ we have. It doesn't produce anything functional. We have a place in the base of our brain called the hypothalamus that reads circulating levels of gases, minerals, hormones, things that are critical to our life. And hormones have more of a global effect physiologically on people. So it's not like it just targets into one thing. They're just global things. The nervous system is more targeted as far as those effects are. So we look at all the hormones and they're going to have a lot bigger function than what people really realize. So the hypothalamus, it reads your circulating levels of hormones. It communicates down a short little vein into a spot that's right in between here, pea-sized gland called the pituitary. And the pituitary sends signals out to regulate how all the different hormonal producing glands produce everything. When you look at the thyroid, it's the only hormonal producing gland that doesn't produce an active hormone. It produces thyroxine, which goes out in the tissues and it gets converted in all the tissues into the functional aspects of the thyroid hormone, and that's T4. T4 converts to T3, T3 to T2, T2 to T1. They haven't studied T1 too much, and most of the literature keys in on T3, but it's not the only thing doing anything. And each one, about 75% of that conversion happens in the muscles, kidneys, liver, some other places, but most of that happens inside of the muscles, inside of somebody. And each one of those conversions can go regular, where you have a normal, active, viable hormone that actually has a clinical effect, and it can be reversed, which the hypothalamus reads a reverse hormone as if it's working, but it's inert. It has no biological function whatsoever. And that's determined by the health of the different tissues. Oh, years ago, we had a woman we were working with. She was obese. She was in her 50s, only had a few wisps of hair that she just drug over the top of her head to make it look like she had something there. Short stature, rotund. Her legs didn't grow properly when she hit puberty. So instead of doing something else, they talked her into amputating one of them and giving her a prosthetic. And you go,
Oh,
man, that's nuts. That's just crazy. But the most striking thing about this woman, she's in her 50s. She never had one cycle her entire life. And you look at her, thinning eyebrows, thin hair, the obese, the menstrual irregularities. That's just textbook classic thyroid problem. And she'd come to my office, do some stuff, her weight would start dropping off. She'd go see her medical doctor. They go, oh, no, that's not true. That can't be it. She'd do what they did. Her weight would come back up. And we had this roller coaster going back and forth. And finally, after a year of this going back and forth, our medical doctor said, why don't you finally have your other doctor order that thyroid test that he was talking about? So we ordered it. It's got T4 normal, T4 reverse, T3 normal, T3 reverse, and it tests for the antibodies against the thyroid. Test gets back, he looks at the number, and he goes, wow, that's normal. I look at it and I go, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. Her reversed hormones were 198 times what the normal one was. No clinical effect of any hormone whatsoever of what she's producing. Is just totally inert. You just look at her and go, there you go. That's the classic textbook, but he didn't even understand what it said. Um, and those are two really key things that I think with all your interaction with women out there as this common thing where the cycles are really upside down. The flow's wrong when you look at the way the uterus engorges. A typical cycle should start off with dark blood because as soon as you start producing progesterone, it makes the arteries of the uterine lining clamp to allow the blood in that to stagnate to make a very rich environment so that it does need a direct blood supply with implantation and it can nurture in that environment. And if there's enough of the right hormones, then placenta will grow and it keeps on going. And with that, blood should be stagnated for pretty close to 10 days. But when you have a woman whose cycles are starting with bright blood, their hormones are upside down. A woman that's having lots of clots and really heavy flow shortly after starting with bright blood, that's some major hormonal problems. And the thyroid's going to be part of that. You can't just throw common things like throw the pill at it, and that really doesn't make sense. When you look at human physiology, actually any animal physiology, as soon as you throw a artificial hormone at a living thing, it dysregulates that feedback loop of the hypothalamus reading what's there, communicating with the pituitary to regulate everything, and then it will chemically just shut down those organs that make those hormones, and they'll atrophy to the point where Medicine doesn't believe that you can ever return those. We've had so many women all the way into their mid 80s who've been on thyroid hormones for sometimes decades. You fix the right things, they start rebuilding it. They wean off their thyroid hormones and their hair starts growing back. Their skin starts to become rich and reflective with multiple colors. Their energy starts to come back. And when their libido comes back, they just get giddy. They,
Mhm.
they, they just do. And it's huge how much interaction goes on with all this. But the thyroid, it's never primary organ in its dysfunction. It doesn't, for some reason, just go into rebellion and quit working like that. When we look at the conversions we were just talking about, most of the bad conversion into the reversed hormones happens because the tissues are toxic.
Mhm.
And when we look at toxicity, most of the toxicity that goes on inside of most of us occurs from gut dysfunction. We've actually got four detox organs, and most think there's only one, and they think that's the liver. The immune system is probably the poorest detoxer we have. And the hormones, when the toxins get outside of the detox system, where the only the immune system can do it, it just creates these hyperinflammatory fires that people got all these names like MCAS and fibromyalgia and all these different words for that going on, but that's really not the problem. It's only a symptom that goes on with it. And when the tissues like the muscles are toxic, they tend to throw out more reversed hormones. And when you start to heal those up, then they start to throw out more normal hormones, which normalizes things. The four detox organs that we have is the small intestinal wall, the colon wall, the gut flora, and then the liver. And with you, I assume you're a pharmacist. Do I have that right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. From what you do, that you have to, when you take oral administration, you have a much higher dose than you expect to be in the blood, because close to three-quarters of that gets denatured in the gut wall before it even hits the liver. When we look at the detox pathways, there's technical names like cytochrome P450 system and all, that's the exact same system our gut uses to absorb nutrients. And we get this huge amount of detox that happens in the gut wall. The gut flora does a lot of amazing things. It makes every hormone that we make, makes every neurotransmitter that we make. Not all of them, but some of them. It's a big contributor to the overall working of the body that goes on in there. When any kind of inflammatory issue goes on, there starts to have these changes that go on inside the gut. And if you talk to people like Candida is pretty much the root problem of almost all chronic illness. Been doing this for 4 decades. We've seen thousands of people doing things. And I can't remember one case where Candida was not the root.
Mm.
Every single case we see of chronic Lyme disease, Candida was the root. It's also the primary complication. Candida was there before it started. Most don't know how to get rid of Lyme disease. It only takes a matter of typically you have it gone in 2 months or less. Three of the co-infection, two of the co-infections that way. The BCA, it takes longer, maybe four. Depends on which strain it is. But the Candida is the one that takes a whole bunch longer. And you got all these people with all these ideas on mechanisms of how that grows. Antibiotics kills the normal flora. You do steroids, same thing. NSAIDs, same thing. But food intolerance does the same thing. Heavy metals does the same thing. Chronic stress does the same thing. And in the book that I wrote, you lay some of those things out and you look at them, you go, this can't be a different mechanism for every single thing going on. It just can't be. You can't have one mechanism for, say, chronic stress and a different mechanism for food intolerance, and a different mechanism for whatever else you want to say that's out there. Huge long list of things. Can't be. It's got to be the same one. And there's a study that come out of one of the medical groups down in the South. I don't remember where it is right now. That gives a key on what that is and what essentially happens. And if we look at the gut lining, it's only one cell layer thick. And that lining should replace itself every 24 hours. If we do a cross section, we look at it sideways, it looks like this, where all my fingers sticking up, those are the microvilli. And those microvilli increase the surface area of the gut about 400 times. Oh, and that's crazy, isn't it? The microvilli, they produce a mucus, and the mucus fills all the space in between the microvilli and caps it over the top. And that's where all the microbiota or the gut flora live. It's all the microbes that live inside of your gut. And if you ever look at an electron micrograph slide of a leaf on a plant or inside of the gut, you can't see the leaf. You couldn't see the gut because of it's just coated in billions of these microbes that live in there. And it's when you look at it, there's no way that the food can actually touch the microvilli. It's the microbes that they go up and they change all the nutrients and they break them up, bring those back down so the microvilli can absorb those. We got the exact same thing that goes on inside the soil with the roots of plants and all that. It's the microbes that convert all the nutrients in absorbable forms so that the plants can take it up. The plants bring about 25% of their nutrients, mostly sugars, down to the roots to feed those microbes to keep them there. And without it, neither one of them will stay alive. And that's the way that our gut is. And the microbes in there communicates with our brain, communicates with the hormonal system and all that. And those cells, they're locked together with something like Velcro, like this. Whenever there's anything inflammatory, and those are called tight junctions. Whenever there's anything inflammatory, those tight junctions loosen up and there's space in between the cells. Normal absorption has to go through the cells. And that's where we get that selective membrane where you can't get things that shouldn't be
Right.
through the gut wall into the bloodstream and overwhelm the liver and go systemic. When those tight junctions start to open, stuff starts to come in between it. Oftentimes those things are toxic and that excites the immune system. Half the immune system's in the gut wall. Literally half of it. It excites the immune system and the immune system starts to attack those toxins. They hide, they try and get into the tissue as soon as they can. They'll get into the cells that line the gut and they start to destroy the cells that line the gut. They create these great big huge holes that you can see. I got some electron micrograph slides where microvilli look like this, and with Crohn's disease, it looks like my knuckles. And all the immune cells, they're called Peyer's patches. There's these little glands, and then you got small ones more on the surface and deeper ones inside. Those have expanded out and they become very huge with the atrophy like this because the toxic overload's so big. It overwhelms everything. As soon as that does, we look at the normal detox loop. It should be the gut wall and the gut flora taking care of the bulk of the toxins that are there. What they miss, the circulation comes right out of the gut, goes into the liver. And the liver, it's designed to catch all that stuff. It's got immune function too. And what it can't deal with, it dumps it back into the gut through the bile. But as soon as the liver gets overwhelmed, all that toxicity spills out systemically and it tries to hide someplace. It'll go out in our secondary elimination organs, which is the lung and the skins. And that's what asthma is a symptom of toxicity, impaired detox pathways, impaired elimination. You look at all your rashes, same thing. It's impaired elimination, impaired detox issues. A woman, when she's in her cycle, it's a unique time where that organ clears its toxins out too, only during her cycle time. So whenever all this stuff starts to go systemic, gets outside of that loop, the immune system can't handle it very well. What can get out through the secondary elimination organs, it does. And what doesn't tries to hide in the fatty tissues. Our hormonal producing glands are 50% fat. That's where the toxins go to hide. The thyroid and the adrenal are the first two that get taken out. And as soon as that starts to get systemic, we start to see thyroid depression, adrenal depression. The studies show this is an absolute reality of what happens with toxicity, but they don't hook where the toxins are coming from. And it's when those toxins build to a certain point, the immune system no longer recognizes those as our own tissue. They look at it as it's a foreign invader and they go to attack it. And there you have the foundation of both your thyroiditis and your Hashimoto's. Your Hashimoto's just says it's an autoimmune issue. We don't know what's causing it. What's interesting, because I got a email recently from a mom we were working with. Her 5-year-old had severe Crohn's. There's a lot of, as the mom put it, fear mongering of a medical specialist in one of the Ivy League schools tied in who's threatening to extract her child and put her in foster care if she doesn't subject to these dangerous experimental IV drugs that could be lethal. And she's playing the two parents against each other. The father's really scared of all this, and the father's more medically minded, and the mother's more naturally minded. And we start working with her. This little girl hadn't grown, she hadn't gained a pound in over a year. 5 years old, that's not normal.
Mm-hmm.
She's tiny, she's small, she's always bleeding out of her gut. She's lays on her tummy on the couch, kicks her legs. She can't be involved in any school activities, she's in gym, but she just lays and kicks. She can't do anything. She's totally withdrawn, antisocial, and all the things of a very sick child. So we start working with her. We start getting these personality changes. She's starting to interact, starting to do things. And the fear mongering has the dad take her down. Second IV, she's bleeding out of her gut. She's totally checked out. She's a solid rash from head to toe. Her skin looks like sandpaper. And she's a black child. So you can't see the pink rashes. And the doctor says, oh, she doesn't have a rash. And you just think, what are you talking about? The skin's so rough. You look at it, it just looks like it feels like sandpaper. And she's bleeding. She's checked out. She's back on the couch. All these things going on. It took about 3.5 weeks to undo that, and got the mom to stop the fear mongering and stop the progression of all this stuff. And I get this email. Mom wasn't feeling really good. Her daughter came up and asked how she was doing. She said, oh, I'm doing okay. How are you? And the little 5-year-old girl says, I'm doing a million bazillion times better. She's charging around the upstairs of their house for the first time in her life. She's giggling, laughing, chasing her sister. She hasn't been able to sit on anything for years. She's riding a tricycle in one day, and this mom's just weeping because she finally has this child that she wanted so much, who's not been normal, not been able to play, not been able to do anything children can do. And you don't get the giggles, you don't get the laugh, you don't get any of the joy. And all of a sudden it's released. And these medical specialists say that you can't resolve Crohn's disease. And you got to put them on these radical medical treatments for the rest of their life. And I'm going, that's nuts. They were told that for like 4 different medical specialists. I've been resolving that thing for decades, and I've got thousands of people that no longer have it anymore. And it's the same thing with the thyroid issues. It's the exact same mechanism that goes on there. There's a study in the American Journal of Pathology from 2008 says an autoimmune process can be arrested. It's stopped when you fix the gut. And that's always the key with all the toxicity issue. It's not rebellious for some unknown reason. The thyroid never responds that way. The thyroid's never primary. It's always responding to distant toxicity And there may be another case than the gut. I don't believe I've ever seen one. It's possible, but the rule of averages, when you see thousands of people over a long period of time, you don't see exceptions. There might be one, but it's not going to be the lion's share of things. And it's amazing how fast you can get this stuff to resolve once you start fixing the gut, which is the hardest organ to fix. It really is. It's so complex, it's so vulnerable, and it's constantly getting assaulted with everything that's out there. Really hoping that RFK can make some changes to get our food supply healthier so that we don't have to deal with all this stuff. That would be really nice.
Mhm.
It really would. But you look at women. We got a consult recently for a couple that can't conceive. She finally got pregnant maybe 2 years ago in mid 30s. Maybe 2 years ago, about as soon as they found out that she was pregnant, she lost it. And I don't know how long they've been trying, but probably for 10 years. And I do a consult with her, and we see all these things of what we're talking about. And you do an evaluation, you find even more than that going on. Once again, what set the stage? Candida, food intolerances, leaky gut, systemic toxicity, but there's a whole bunch of other things because they're both from a different ethnicity in a different country that has endemic disease problems like hepatitis. And people go in for a transfusion. Um, like we had one mom come in a while ago. She just was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Her kids were always sick, and check her out. She was born in a different country. Her mom almost bled to death. So they gave her a transfusion. That transfusion gave her hepatitis, at least 4 different kinds of STDs, Lyme
Mhm.
disease, multiple co-infections, Candida, and all this stuff. And she transferred that to all of her children, her
Mhm.
husband, and all of that. And when we found that, we started working with her. I said, we should really work with your whole family because we could stop this curse. We could
Mhm.
just kill it so that your children never have to deal with this stuff and you can have healthy grandchildren and go on. And it's really an amazing thing because we worked with everybody in the household, and I was right. They all had the same thing because it's all fluid transfer diseases. We think of Lyme disease, STDs, and things like autoimmune. We think they're genetic. And do you know about epigenetics? Okay. Epigenetics is a pretty neat study that shows that every gene that we have has 30,000 different potential ways to express itself, and the way we live determines what that is. So you take
Mhm.
somebody with a snip on their genes where they can't produce L-methylfolate.
Mhm.
We start working with those things. You got to supplement that at first. You heal the gut up, and sooner or later down the road, they don't need it anymore because they're producing it. They still got the snip. And that's one of the big problems with a lot of the testing is it doesn't allow for the body adjusting for things. And you look at biology, we're so complex and so interactive. It's really hard to isolate one thing. It's like impossible because there's so many possibilities that are there with things. And we look at stuff, these things that people think are genetic, where it's something because of a failed system somewhere distant, but it'll perpetuate for all generations
Mhm.
till somebody addresses it. It's an amazing thing. Guess how long it took us to clear the hepatitis?
Couple months.
Not even that.
Yeah.
6 weeks max, and it's gone. And that's one of those things that the medical system doesn't believe you could ever address.
Mhm.
Epstein-Barr is another one they think you can never address. And those two are really big factors with thyroid. Epstein-Barr typically is 4 weeks or less. It's
Mhm.
gone. It's not there. And we look at things like the thyroid, it'll heal before you get the gut all the way healed. Because once you start everything in motion, the toxicity drops way off, but you got to keep working to restore the integrity of the microvilli. has to do with all your digestive issues, restoring gut flora, removing food intolerances, and all these things. It's super interactive, and it takes quite a while to do that. But you look at something like Candida, it's got three forms closely associated with a fourth. We know about the yeast form, and that's pretty easy to clear out. And all your Candida cleanses, they only hope to reduce that. And you can't get rid of Candida. It has to be in a normal balance with the other flora, and it's the other flora that keep it in check. So yeast form, fungal parasite form is closely associated with mold. And when we look at the fungal parasite form, when you look at a fungal body, it's got these fuzzy things that look like these gentle little hairs that stick out. Those hairs are called myceta. They're the feeding tubules. Those are made up of chitin. Your immune system can't touch chitin. The normal gut flora and the flora that grows inside a woman's reproductive tract is almost the same. It can dissolve that chitin and keep it in check. But when you kill the normal flora, there's nothing to keep Candida in check. And that's why it's one of the biggest pathogens that grows. So to restore the health of the gut so it's not going to come back, you've got to fix all the flora. And you look at all the approaches that people do out there. We test everybody as individuals on individual products. And we probably tested hundreds of flora supplements. I know three that work, and one of those three I haven't used in almost a year. And most of the supplement industry is that way. There's very few things left that actually work. What worked before COVID hit, COVID disrupted the supply chain, and the high quality building blocks to build things disappeared. You've taken what was the best things in the entirety of North America, no longer usable. You got to keep finding stuff. The amount of things that actually work is huge, but doesn't really work to get a program. Those get people in trouble, they get them really sick and all that. You really need some directed care
Mm-hmm.
for taking care of things. And those are the things you do to bring the thyroid back. All of the adaptogens you throw at thyroids, I quit using those probably 2 decades ago. You can keep throwing them at people, they never get any better. It's just not the issue. It's not the issue at all. And the adrenals, it's the same thing. The adrenal is what makes the precursors all the sexual hormones. So you take the
Mm-hmm.
adrenal out, you're not making your normal hormones. You can't have normal cycles. You can't have normal fertility. You don't have normal drives. It's not there. And everything ties back to what Hippocrates said. He believed all disease starts in the gut, and science pretty well proves that out. You take decades of clinical experience doing things where you have the tools to evaluate everything. You localize what primary root causes are, where they're at. It's almost always the gut, and it's almost always Candida that's there. So
Yeah.
that was an earful.
You gave beautiful context to it and just such a good background and understanding because the thyroid, like doctors just test for TSH. I'm sure you're well aware, but even for someone who's trying to get pregnant, that's all they're testing and they're not even looking at the gut. So I think for anyone who's listening, this has got to be such a huge eye opener because people are struggling to get pregnant for years and years, and none of these things that you just brought up are being addressed. They're not being looked at. It's just take this fertility treatment, go do IVF with no guarantee, and you're gonna be, still sick afterwards if you want to continue to have more children. And like you had mentioned earlier, you're gonna pass these things down to your kids if you're not addressing them before you conceive.
Yeah, the one mom that we just did an evaluation with that I brought up at the beginning, I'm looking at her and what's going on with her. I said, you're probably going to be very highly likely inside at about 4 months to get pregnant. And everything that you have, your husband has. We can get you fairly free of it, but he's going to constantly pass it back and forth. You take things like your flora, and I said earlier, the flora inside of a woman's reproductive tract is almost identical to what the gut is. It's fed a different way, and you look at women that are been on the pill for a while, the way her flora in her reproductive tract gets fed is through the sugars in her cervical mucus, whereas it's the fermented foods, primarily the fermented fibers and all that feed the flora inside of our gut. So the food is a little bit different, but what's in there is almost identically the same. When a couple gets together, within a few months, their flora normalizes. It becomes the same.
Mhm.
And it becomes the same, not for the better of the two, but for the worse of the two. And there's all these things that people think, like Lyme disease, they think it's tick-borne. No, it's not tick-borne, it's fluid transfer. So anything that can transfer fluid from one individual to another, one organism to another, carries it. So you take an old world date from back in the 50s, go down to the IHOP and share a milkshake. You've just shared body fluids. Doesn't have to be sexual contact. The sexual fluids have it. The blood bank in Minnesota and Wisconsin, 2 to 3% of that's infected with um, Lyme disease. You take the blood banks of your communist countries like Russia, places like that, it's endemic to have hepatitis in it and other different things that go on with that just because of the way the societies are. We have all these things that people don't really realize. And fertility is a couple thing. It's not you or me.
Mhm.
It's together. The pH determines the sex. Did you know that?
Of the baby?
Yeah,
No, I didn't know that.
yeah. And for the people who want to be the California couple that have the perfect 2 children, one male and one female, the acidic pH in the combined sexual fluids at the time of conception determines the sex of the child. Acidic, it throws girls 75% of the time at least. If it's basic, it throws boys. So women can do different things with foods. The easiest way is douches, like a vinegar douche or a baking soda and water douche is probably the easiest for a woman to change that if they really want to do something. And it's not a boatload of stuff. It's just a minor thing. But that's really a cool thing. It really is because people that only want 2 children, they want a boy and a girl. That's that's about the only way to really help that along at all. But all of the things that we're talking about, if one in a couple has it, the other one is going to. And you can't address fertility as, okay, the guy's got a low sperm count. Why? They do an ultrasound, they see eggs develop in the uterus, and they go, oh, you're about ready to ovulate. Are you? The amount of times with infertility going on, the women are not ovulating. They're going through the normal cycle of hormones, and sometimes they even get that excessive cervical mucus right at ovulation. But oftentimes women are just not really cued into that at all, and it's pH can be a huge part. Nothing physiologically works outside of this really narrow band of optimal pH. So we've got all these different factors that go on, and you look at the way this arena is addressed medically. I think it's inhuman. It's embarrassing. It's prying into people's private lives in a whole bunch of ways. It doesn't need to happen at all. It really doesn't. You don't need samples of fluids and things like that. We test all these things in a functional way. There's nothing invasive whatsoever. And we can tell typically inside of a couple hours of doing an evaluation exactly what's going on. And we do this at a distance too. We work with people halfway around the world.
Mhm.
Uh, we had a phone call a while back. A couple, their 5-year-old daughter had spent 5.5 days in a research hospital getting scans and tests. and then connected to two prestigious medical schools, and then 5.5 days of scans and testing. I have no idea what's going on. So maybe you should make an appointment with a rheumatologist. We don't know.
Hmm.
Family member heard about that, begged to her parents to with us. They called us up. We did an evaluation. In 2 hours, we knew exactly what was going on. This little girl's just laid in bed crying. She couldn't be touched. She couldn't move. She's just in so much pain. She's just crying. And that's enough to break any parent's heart. We do an evaluation. We tell them what to do. They had some of what they needed, and we had to send them some more. Next morning, she was out of bed the first time. 3 days later, she's outside. 6 months down the road, she's healthier than she'd ever been in her life. And it's the children that really break our hearts as far as that goes. They just shouldn't have to suffer. And when they do, it really rips a parent apart. But these people are longing to have children. It's generally not this huge monumental monolith you've got to climb to do it. There's some simple, basic reasons why. And the thyroid's almost always involved,
Hmm.
almost always, along with several other factors. But most of those we talked about. And once you set that in stage, you can be pretty fertile in a fairly short period of time.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I would love for you to share with everyone about your book, Exposing Lyme and Chronic Illness, and what you can expect from reading that book. I definitely know I'm going to check it out myself.
Okay. One of the things we specialize in Lyme disease, and the only reason we can be effective with Lyme disease is because of what I know about the gut. That's really my primary specialty, but it allows you to resolve everything that's out there. Everything. Absolutely everything. And I'd written a book, Breaking the Chronic Nightmare of Lyme Disease, quite a while back. It got canceled by Amazon, wouldn't let me promote it, do anything along that line. So I got a hold of a group who coaches you on how to fix all that stuff. They didn't really know what they're doing and they undid stuff, but I rewrote the book and I decided Lyme disease, the only reason why people get Lyme disease is because this Lyme Candida connection. I had a chapter on Candida, and then I'm looking at how everything interacts and functions. There's 5 or 6 chapters of physiology in the book. And I talk to different docs and clinically about things from all professions.
Mm.
The and people will bring up clinical things. They'll throw around their favorite therapies, but they have no idea what's going on. And I'll start talking about physiology with a function of what sets the stage for everything. And they just look like a deer in the headlights. They don't study that. Uh, talking to doctors, I don't think I could fill my hand up with the amount of doctors I've interacted with in 4 decades that study physiology after they graduate from school. It's really a shame. But so we added all of those interactive things, autoimmune issues, what's going on with those, hormonal dysfunction, what's going on with that, toxicity, what's happening with that, gut function, how all that stuff interacts. A lot of food intolerances in there. It's book's a little over 300 pages. There's almost 200 literature sites in it. And I probably could have done double that. I just got tired of making them.
Yeah.
You do get tired, but the book's written in a common language, the way that I'm talking, so people can understand. And every chapter, except for the one on hormone dysfunction and its invasion of intimacy, is the only chapter that I don't put a story on what's about that. And I didn't think it was appropriate there. We look at in the Bible, the Song of Solomon is one of the most erotic books ever made. And it opens the curtains, it sets the stage, and it closes them, and lets your imagination go with wherever that's supposed to go. And I really believe that's how intimacy should be. And I just didn't think it was appropriate to put a story in that. But every other chapter has got a story on somebody that was severely disabled with that kind of condition, what it took to resolve that, which brings up something that a lot of people don't realize. The clinical effectiveness of doctors with anything is only 20 to 25% of the people that they see. They can give any clinical help at all, and that's almost always just a reduction in symptoms.
Mm.
We're over 4 times that in complete resolution back to full health of the failures that have been to the best specialists in the world. Doesn't matter how many doctors they've been to, and we're still in a mid 90% of getting those people healthy again. And it doesn't take nearly as long as people think. So that
Mhm.
book is all the background on what's going on and generically what needs to happen with that. So
Amazing. The link for that will be in the show notes. And Dr. Brad is also offering a free consultation. You just have to mention that you listen to this podcast. And can you let the listeners where they can find you, connect with you, and learn more? Because you are a wealth of information.
yeah, the website, it's healthfullyu.com. You could put that link in there too, and people could chase that. The consults that I do are like the way that I talk, and it's pretty common for people to learn more in a consult than they've learned working with multiple practitioners over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but we dig it into root causes, what's actually going on, interacting, and setting the stage for what's there and what it's going to look like, how to address that, and how to resolve it.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't talk about me there. I talk about what's going on clinically with a person.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that about thyroiditis and Hashimoto's and really where, thyroid issues are rooted in, right? Our gut.
Yeah,
It's just so important. And I know that the gut health is really, trendy right now, but I don't think that anyone has spoken to it with such detail and background knowledge and experience. Like you said, you've just seen thousands and thousands of cases, and you can't argue that, right? Nobody can dispute what you have seen and the success that you have seen as well. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
yeah, this has been good. So thanks for inviting me to this. This has been a good talk.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Rising into Mindful Motherhood podcast. If this episode resonated with you or gave you an aha moment, stop what you're doing right now and write a review. This simple act of kindness helps me get this podcast out to connect with as many women as I possibly can. I also have a special offer. If you send me a screenshot of your review, I will take $250 off one of my premium coaching containers. Let me know what resonated with you the most and why. So connect with me in my free Facebook community or tag me on Instagram. You'll find both listed below. Thanks again from the bottom of my heart for tuning in to this episode, and I'll see you next time.